Hi, everybody. Welcome here. We are so excited to have you this evening. This is going to be a bit more casual than usual, but we are still going to have a great conversation here this evening. For those of you who don't know me on YouTube, my name is Rae Martens. I am a knowledge broker with the Family Engagement in Research Training Program. And with me, as always, is my colleague, Dr. Kinga Posniak, and we are just here tonight to talk about knowledge translation and how it is connected to social media, and to think about how to do this efficiently in terms of, well, not only efficiently, but creatively, because I think some of these conversations and some of the planning can be a bit daunting in nature. And so this monthly event that we have is something called Luke's Legacy Research Rounds, and it is an opportunity to hear about research work, all in a plain language format. And it's all, the whole event series is based on, or actually dedicated to the life of my son, Luke, who passed away in 2020. And he was the type of kid who was quite opinionated in nature. He liked to feel like he deserved a seat at every table when it came to that. And so that just became an excellent opportunity to really reflect his memory in understanding that we want to invite everybody to the table and understand that we all deserve that space, and to interact with new knowledge and think about how we can connect and maybe work together in the future, things like that. So I am just going to share my screen to get things started. So yes, as I mentioned, this is about making translated knowledge impactful in social media spaces. My background is in knowledge mobilization, and I have been, I guess, despite the fact that I'm a Gen Xer and I balk at the idea of the notion of being an influencer, I am one, and I'm trying to embrace that. So I wanted to kind of take today to be this sort of informal space where it kind of feels like back in elementary school. And of course, I'm dating myself, but you know, when the teacher would push in the TV card and you're like, yes, movie day. This is kind of what I was hoping for with this conversation today. And if I'm going to really authentically introduce myself, I'm going to do it using TikTok. So I apologize.
Here's a song to get to know about me. I'll start with my name, my age, my height, my gender identity, and my favorite game. This is where I live now, and this is where I'm from. Here's what I do for work, and what I hope to become. Here's a guilty pleasure and a pet peeve, and something I like, a goal that I hope one day to achieve. And can I ride a bike? My favorite place I've been to, and a place I want to go. My favorite time of year, and my favorite TV show. Here's a random fact you might not guess. Surprise! A thing that brings me joy and brings me stress. I really try to avoid that. I have this many siblings, that's the size of my shoe. And I hope you'll use this song to let everybody get to know you.
And with that in mind, I think it's kind of one of those things where I enjoy, when it comes to new knowledge or getting to know somebody, getting to know somebody is new knowledge. I really appreciate being surprised by certain concepts. I think that that's one element that becomes really dynamic in social media spaces, is that, oh, that has that opportunity to shift from confusion, frustration, all of those feelings, whatever you're looking to elicit as a goal, having something a little bit out of the ordinary definitely is an opportunity to engage and pull people into something unique about whatever research information that you're drawing in. Because how we started essentially was this idea of this objectivist myth of knowing, that it was always about scientific knowledge being brought to you by an expert and then pushed out to amateurs, and that's it. But we've kind of shifted a significant amount when it comes to how interactions now come about when it comes to promoting new knowledge. And now we've moved more to something along the lines of Palmer's Community of Truth, which is basically you have learning mentors who have opportunities for people to learn and interact with new information. And we also know and understand that it's because of that practice that people become more empowered. They take that information in, they build trust along the way. So in approaching how I got into the work that I do, some of the goals that I really tried to convey in terms of spreading knowledge is, what do I want to say? Number one, what skills do I have to bring to make that happen? Who do I want to hear that message? All of these things kind of play into being an important factor of helping you decide what steps to take, what mode of communication to use, and how you're going to draw people into your message. This, for example, is one thing that I did just for fun from a science communication standpoint. And I can say that I also know that this was shared with the entire board for the Canadian Institute for Health Research. And that was a fact to which I was delighted and also horrified at the same time. But again, I'm sorry.
Watch this. They have two people. It's swell with two people. First eye. Then she's then bleed. But I can't do it alone. Watch this.
So with messages in that specific sense, the one thing that tied the music together to the message that I shared was, but I can't do it alone. And so it's always done in partnership, obviously. Now, one of the other factors that comes with that too, in terms of sharing messages in that particular mode, is that it works from two, like dual benefits with that particular platform. One of them is people stop and they pause and they read and they take in that information along the way. The other is because someone has to reverse and engage with that to a greater depth, your messages actually get spread by the algorithm to a greater degree because they benefit. Videos are beneficial when they're engaged with more frequently and to a greater depth. That will be boosted out to more people along the way. And so when it comes to the skills that I decided that I could bring to the conversation was I feel like I'm fairly reasonable when it comes to consolidating of knowledge. When it comes to criticisms and contextualizing things, I feel like I'm fairly reasonable about, but these are all essentially things that helped me better understand where I fit in the bigger picture, because when I have that self-awareness, then I can figure out what that next step is. So what's the platform of choice? What message am I trying to bring? Another really great mode to consider in social media, this was something that was done by Heather Patterson in Calgary, actually, who was a photographer and also works for Alberta Health Services, and decided to capture a bigger picture on how the impacts of COVID through photography, black and white photography. They had an Instagram account and they just shared these experiences and anecdotes along the way. And actually this became a book as well too, because part of the impact and the message that came out of this reality sharing it through photography was, it is really difficult to understand why your life shifted so dramatically over the last couple of years without understanding what that looks like on the front line for frontline healthcare workers as well. And so it is really, I having been in this space myself where I have seen someone code and I had to duck out of the way while the room flooded full of people, is a feeling that is not something that everybody is used to. But what the prevailing message that comes out of things like that is curiosity and discomfort and a little bit of vulnerability and that desire to learn more. And all of those things are things that can help promote goals along the way if you're looking for further conversation. If you're not looking for further conversation, there's that need for that contextualization. What does this do? What are you trying to tell? What story are you trying to tell in these moments as well? some other modes with that as well can be digital stories. One person that we connected with through the School of Public Policy for some work on COVID was Mike Lang, who does digital stories and trains people in order to do so as well too. And this is one specifically about mental health and the impacts of the pandemic on the disability community as well. So this is Jillian, who is a member of the Youth Advisory Group for Child Right Network through SPORE.
My mother worked at the neonatal intensive care unit. So when my brother and I were born, 3 months early, she knew what to expect. And when we were both diagnosed with cerebral palsy, her and my dad knew we could still have a great childhood. Growing up, I did have lots of appointments and medical procedures, but I went to a regular school and managed to graduate with my class. From a young age, my parents knew I was the type of person who could advocate for myself, and I participated in everything I could. Eventually, our whole family became advocates for people with disabilities, working hard to change people's assumptions and decrease barriers. Even though I had always advocated for myself, things were difficult as I moved into adulthood. I moved out on my own, hired my own caregivers, and eventually received a technical writing certificate. Then COVID-19 happened. My brothers lived at home and my sister lived by herself. So with the lockdown rules, they could all be together except for me. So I stopped going to my parents' house. At the grocery store, it was hard to ask people for help because everyone wanted to keep their distance. I couldn't easily put on a mask, and I constantly had to justify why I wasn't wearing one. Sometimes people would even hand me a mask, but I couldn't put it on. Eventually, I stopped going to the grocery store. At the coffee shop, there were barricades everywhere to keep people at a distance. The plastic screen made it impossible for the cashier to hear me. They had chairs in front of the counter, so I could not reach the terminal. Eventually, I stopped going to the coffee shop. I had tried my whole life to be an active and contributing member of society and felt pushed out of everything. But isolation and loneliness intensified the anxiety and depression that I had struggled with since high school. Then one morning, I got a phone call. I felt a glimmer of hope when the voice on the other end said I was eligible for the vaccine and they could come to me. I was excited to have me and those close to me vaccinated so I could get back to a somewhat normal life. Today, with the vaccine passports, I feel comfortable and confident going out in public again. People are more willing to help me, and I've even noticed less people asking me about wearing a mask. It feels like people are less afraid. It feels like there are less barriers. Many people like me and my family have worked so hard to decrease barriers for those with disabilities. And I think it is important not to throw away all the hard work when the next crisis hits.
So these videos, there was another one from a parent lens as well too, but they were complementary to some work associated with creating some policy recommendations for future pandemics and things like that as well too. So their impacts were very much far-reaching along the way. And I have seen these played at a few different places where it would have resonated and had a purpose overall. So it definitely drives the point home. Oops. But feeling, I think, is also something to really consider here as well too, because it's not always going to be something, the feeling that you want to elicit doesn't always match the message. And so this is kind of a bit of an example of what I mean.
I don't think it's appropriate for kids to be exposed to this. I think it sends the wrong message. Growing up, this would not be tolerated. So why is it tolerated now? Kids are the future. They're led by example. So be the right one. Show them what's right and what's wrong. Don't cook your steak well done.
Yep. Don't cook your steak well done. Obviously, if there's a few dynamics to consider here in terms of it is a singular point of humor. And while the internet is riddled with moments like that, it is good for 30 seconds of, for the joke, and then they move on. In terms of crafting your message, it's important to consider what that looks like in terms of whether you want people to return back to that message and to share it elsewhere. All of those factors will come into these aspects of social media as well when you share your KT tools or your KT message. And in some cases as well too, this is my argument for design, especially designing with people with lived experience in the space, because if you build it, they won't necessarily come. Squirrel never came. It's very sad, but that's just one of those things where it's just really sometimes these messages can be prescriptive. Sometimes it can be almost to a point of feeling like it's just fulfilling an obligation with your grant. But if you really want your work to exist in a space, it's worth considering not only about what the message is, but about who you're sending it to and who you're sharing it with, and whether or not that will continue the legacy of whatever you're wishing to share as well too. This was something that I found on Twitter a few weeks back, but I thought it was a really interesting thing. I mean, this is obviously an informal poll within a science communication class, but in terms of prioritizing the notion of where I receive information online, this was how they ranked according to indicators here. And just for the folks in social media, or sorry, watching this on YouTube, I just wanted to share that the rubrics were entertainment factor, accessibility to broad audience, validity of information, as well as aesthetics. So these are things that kind of came in as values specifically within the class. But it does kind of resonate in terms of, like, I was surprised by a lot of this in terms of the things that were meaningful. And obviously these were spaces where people talk about science, but at the same time, it makes you really curious to know what, and this is a question that I am considering addressing to some degree too, is what makes it work for some people? What makes it successful? I think that there's a lot of dynamics that are worth kind of examining to a greater depth. And because design obviously has two perspectives in some cases, as much as we try as we might, we think that we might have like the greatest idea in the world. It is infinitely better to avoid animal butts and consider what patients or family members or people with lived experience might need in the moment. So co-design, that's my other pitch and argument for that as well too, with your KT products. These are two examples of things that we do within our research or engagement and research training program. Is we have our research rounds, which is this monthly event. And this is an opportunity to talk about that Palmer's framework for truth, in terms of that interaction piece where people have an opportunity to be colleagues, if you will, no matter what role you come in, be it parent or clinician and things like that. And there's that space to kind of feel like you are invested in the work. And in some cases, some studies haven't been entirely finished yet. So, there's opportunities to ask questions and say, hey, how do we move forward with this? What do you think would work? And so there's great spaces for interaction, but also what was really unique about the behavioral aspect of this and that type of interaction is that Kinga and myself, we suddenly realized at one point, just mid-conversation, that people were craving an opportunity to kind of not decompress, but just kind of like process all that they took in, much like if you go to a conference and people are like, you go to the coffee machine and you're talking to someone like, oh, that was a great keynote, and I want to talk more about this. What did you like about it? Oh, what did you like about it? People were looking for that opportunity. And within that, we added an optional extra half hour for people to chat afterwards to kind of feel like they can have that, get that energy out, because some of the topics are also quite significant and dynamic. Like next month is about medical trauma in children with medical complexity. And so, that's going to be an intense one where people are going to want to have a lot of feelings associated with it. So to provide that space becomes a measurable, important outcome in terms of processes that people value in terms of receiving that knowledge. The podcast is another option as well too, and part of that ended up being because we really came to understand that not everybody values that need to, or that structured thing that comes with Zoom calls to sit down. They want to learn and move at the same time. And so while the podcast is slow in progress, what it is essentially attempting to capture is best practices on family engagement and helping people better understand lessons that have come in the process of doing this type of work. If you're utilizing podcast formats on social media, I recommend knowing your budget and understanding the platforms that feature it, because it does come with a cost to have it long term. But at the same time as well too, that becomes another thing that you need to share, and you need to understand whether or not it is something of value to your particular demographic of people that you serve as well. Because design overall has a bit of a, we talk about the proverbial table that we invite people to, but we don't really think about, and I think it's really key here, about tables have different designs as well, depending on where you go. I mean, in this particular case in the photo, it's a cafe format because your overall goal essentially is to have intimate conversation a lot of the time. In the times that it ends up being more people, you want that kind of spatial forgiveness to be able to push a few tables together so people can connect. But that might look different for a bar or a lounge or a family restaurant. All of these things will come with different things. So we need to think about that. If we're inviting people in to interact with that information, that's going to come with very necessary push forward in how you design that. And so when it comes to the themes that I feel I value in the context of the work that we do here, is we want that community feeling. We want that opportunity for people to connect and have it respectful, plain language. We want it to be unstructured. We want it to be memorable. When I say call your mom, it's one of those things where you feel like you want to go talk to someone and share what you learned. That's the goals that I hope to promote in our own work here, but those might be different for whatever you feel, and that might help kind of design what you're looking to accomplish with sharing that information as well. I also want to say it's okay to share little bits of your life. Just do it safely as well too. I mean, I don't think that the world is going to shift in any dynamic range if you share that you have 2 dogs and a cat, or 2 kids, or whatever the case may be. This was just something that I did. I like houseplants. That was my pandemic hobby that I picked up. And so then I started with this video.
I want you to know that I'm in your hand. Why don't we leave it at that? Nothing to say, and everything gets in the way. Seems you can never be.
Things like that, just interesting visuals all help in that space. Details, just anything that can help make it concise. What's nice about some platforms is that they will kind of help you think about how you want to plot out any sort of information that you wish to share. So when it comes to designing stuff next, one factor when it comes to my own goals that I want to consider is taking some of this, aggregate all the information that we've had about pandemic impact on the disability community. And I want to kind of take it and think about how do we shift the conversation a little bit. And one of the things that I am considering doing is to revisit the notion of the front porch photos, which was a social media trend early on. Obviously, they said afterwards, public health was like, no, this is still this is still risky business at the same time, but it's enough of a thing that resonated with people in a big way in order to stay connected. So I'm looking to revisit that subject a little bit more. I'm going to connect with a variety of people and take photos on front stoops. And I'm going to share the experiences that they had or they continue to have, because I think the prevailing message is this is still a struggle. We need to continue to be mindful of how we support people in that way. That's my primary goal. But I'm also looking to pepper an Instagram account with not only the photos and the stories, but data and painting a relevant picture along the way. And so that is easily shareable. It's easily something that can potentially go viral if you wanted to. But it's a long-term investment, and it's also art in my own way. So that's my own personal value from that. But it's something that I'm looking to push out into the world anyways in that way. So some of that comes with understanding that there's just depth and richness and despair in some ways, because there are some people who are still very much struggling. So this is my current thing that's floating in my head in terms of how to push this information forward out to people, because that story still needs to be told. And that is honestly the little bit of insights that I wanted to bring today. I just wanted to thank you all for listening to me today.